Picture this. I'm standing in my driveway holding a $50 fine for excessive holiday decorations. 3 strings of lights that my dead wife picked out, while the HOA president smirks and says my Christmas display is lowering property values. That was my mistake. I should have gotten angry. Instead, I smiled. 6 months later, that same woman was literally on her knees in front of 47 neighbors, begging me to shut off the most spectacular light show our town had ever seen. Lasers painting her financial crimes across the community center walls while news cameras rolled and police took notes. The crisp December air carried the scent of pine needles as Beatrice Thornfield's heels clicked away from my door that first night. She thought she'd won. Poor Beatrice had no idea she'd just declared war on a widowed electrical engineer with nothing left to lose and a very specific set of skills. What would you do if your HOA attacked your last connection to a deceased spouse? And where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. I guarantee half of you have HOA nightmare stories too. Let me tell you about Marcus Hartwell. That's me, 47 years old, electrical engineer, and as of 2 years ago, a widower who thought he'd found peace in Willowbrook Estates. My wife Sarah had this obsession with Christmas lights that bordered on the magnificent. Every November, she'd spread graph paper across our kitchen table, sketching holiday displays like she was designing a NASA mission. The woman would spend hours researching LED versus incandescent, debating warm white versus multicolor with the intensity of a Supreme Court justice. We moved to Willowbrook 3 years back for Sarah's health. The doctor said clean air and less stress might help. Cancer had other plans. She passed on a Tuesday in March, and I kept those lights up until Easter because taking them down felt like erasing her from the world. So when December rolled around again, I put up the same 3 modest strings. Nothing fancy, just her final gift to the neighborhood. The warm glow reminded me of her laugh, the way she'd stand in our doorway with hot chocolate, admiring her handiwork. That's when I met Beatrice Thornfield. Picture a woman who iron presses her pajamas and alphabetizes her spice rack. Beatrice had ruled our HOA for 8 years like a suburban Stalin, complete with the paranoia and power trips. Married to some real estate developer who'd built half the neighborhood, she wore authority like that signature pearl necklace, tight, suffocating, and impossible to ignore. The woman had a gift for targeting anyone who didn't fit her vision of suburban perfection. Poor Mr. Kowalski got slammed with $300 in fines for his bird feeder. Apparently cardinals were unsightly pests. 5-year-old Emma Chen's sidewalk chalk hopscotch squares earned her mother a violation for unauthorized street art. And the Pattersons? Their teenage son's basketball hoop sat exactly 2 inches too close to the street, which somehow threatened the very fabric of our community. But here's where it gets rich. Beatrice's own fence stood 6 inches higher than regulations. Her garage-based craft business, selling macrame plant holders that looked like spider webs having nervous breakdowns, violated the no home businesses rule. Did those infractions ever make her violation list? What do you think? The morning she delivered my notice, I was brewing coffee in my kitchen, the rich aroma of Colombian dark roast filling the air like incense. Through the window, I watched her approach, heels clicking on my frozen walkway with military precision, clipboard clutched like a holy relic. "Mr. Hartwell," she announced at 7 a.m. sharp, not bothering with human decency, "your holiday display violates community standards. All decorations must be removed by January 2nd. I stepped outside, coffee mug warming my hands against the December bite. The morning air was so crisp it made my nostrils tingle. "But it's still November, Mrs. Thornfield." "Rules evolve," she replied, that practiced smile never reaching her eyes. "We can't have the neighborhood looking like a trailer park." 3 strings of lights. That's what triggered this woman's control complex. $50 fine if they're not down by tomorrow, she continued, escalating to $100 daily thereafter. She handed me the violation notice with the ceremony of a monarch bestowing punishment. I took that paper, the texture rough against my fingers, and smiled. "Absolutely, ma'am. Wouldn't dream of upsetting community standards." As her heels clicked away, I stood there breathing in the December morning, that mixture of pine needles from neighboring wreaths and the lingering coffee aroma from my kitchen. That's when it hit me. Beatrice had just declared war on a dead woman's Christmas lights. The HOA board was Beatrice plus 2 spineless accomplices who'd rubber stamp her grocery list if she asked. Most neighbors whispered support but scattered like roaches when she appeared. Previous victims had learned to pay their fines and keep quiet. But I was living on a fixed income, and $50 wasn't pocket change. More importantly, I wasn't about to let some power-drunk suburban dictator disrespect my wife's memory. Some people collect stamps, others garden. Me? I was about to discover my new hobby, HOA warfare. I took down Sarah's lights on January 3rd, just like Beatrice demanded. Spent 2 hours in the freezing cold, carefully coiling each strand the way Sarah used to, loops over my elbow, secured with twist ties. My breath came out in white puffs as I worked, the kind of cold that makes your fingers ache even through gloves. Stored everything neatly in labeled boxes in my garage. Sarah had been obsessive about organization. Each decoration had its place, each box marked with her precise handwriting. I left the garage door open while I worked because, honestly, the memories were overwhelming and I needed air. Big mistake. 3 days later, Beatrice was back. This time she brought reinforcements. Some poor soul from the architectural committee who looked like he'd rather be getting a root canal. "Mr. Hartwell," she announced, consulting her clipboard like she was reading the Constitution, "you're in violation of Storage Ordinance 47B. Holiday decorations must not be visible from common areas." I blinked. "They're in my garage." "Your garage door was open during storage activities. Several neighbors complained about the unsightly boxes." She handed me another violation notice. $75 fine for improper storage practices. The architectural committee guy studied his shoes like they held the secrets of the universe. Even he knew this was ridiculous. That night, I did what any reasonable engineer does when attacked by bureaucratic nonsense. I went to war with research. Spread the HOA bylaws across my kitchen table like battle plans, armed with coffee and the kind of focused rage that builds bridges and splits atoms. 3 hours later, I struck gold. Turns out our HOA hadn't filed required annual reports with the state in 3 years. That's not just sloppy, that's potentially illegal. The state requires HOAs to file financial disclosures annually, listing income, expenses, and reserve funds. If your HOA hasn't filed state reports, they lose legal standing to enforce rules. But wait, there's more. I spent the next week playing amateur private investigator, walking the neighborhood with a tape measure and camera. You know what I discovered? Beatrice's fence was exactly 6 inches taller than the maximum height allowed. Her precious craft business had customers coming and going from her garage 3 times a week. And that no commercial vehicles rule she loved enforcing? Her husband's development company truck had been parked in their driveway every weekend for 2 years. I documented everything. Photos, measurements, timestamps, built a case file that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. Then I filed formal complaints against all 3 violations, complete with supporting evidence. Delivered them personally to the HOA board, with copies to every board member. The smell of fresh ink and righteous indignation followed me as I made my rounds. 2 days later, I got a call from Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who lived 3 houses down. Her voice was shaky but excited. "Marcus, dear, you need to know something. Beatrice called an emergency board meeting last night. They're trying to change the storage rules retroactively to make your violations stick." Retroactively, like some kind of suburban time travel legislation. But here's where it gets interesting. Word was spreading. Mr. Kowalski stopped by with homemade pierogi and war stories about his bird feeder battle. The Chens brought cookies and photos of their daughter's chalk art violation. Even quiet Mr. Rodriguez from the corner house showed up with documentation of his own HOA harassment. We started meeting for coffee at my kitchen table, an informal support group for HOA victims. The smell of fresh brewed caffeine mixed with the sweet satisfaction of shared rebellion. Everyone had stories, everyone had receipts. That's when I discovered something beautiful. Beatrice's authority was built on fear and isolation. Take that away, and she was just another middle-aged woman with too much time and not enough purpose. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for Thursday night. Beatrice planned to ram through new storage rules and increase my fine to $150 for pattern of violations. She also wanted to place a lien on my property if I didn't pay up immediately, but I had other plans. Thursday evening, I showed up to that meeting with a briefcase full of evidence and a room full of neighbors who'd suddenly found their voices. The community center smelled like industrial cleaning solution and nervous sweat as we filed in. Beatrice's eyes went wide when she saw my backup. For 8 years, these meetings had been her private theater. Tonight, she had an audience she hadn't invited. "Mr. Hartwell," she began, trying to regain control, "this meeting is to address your continued violations." "Actually," I interrupted, standing up with my briefcase, "I think we need to discuss some other violations first, starting with your failure to file state-required financial reports for the past 3 years. The silence that followed was so complete you could hear the fluorescent lights humming overhead. Beatrice's face went through more color changes than a mood ring in a house fire. 2 weeks after my little document dump at the board meeting, Beatrice escalated to full nuclear mode. She hired what she called a professional community management company to handle HOA affairs. Funny thing about this company, turned out to be owned by her brother-in-law, a guy named Rick, who drove a pickup truck with truck nuts hanging from the trailer hitch and thought professional management meant charging everyone through the nose. The new fees hit like a sledgehammer: $200 per month administrative assessment for all residents, plus 6 months of retroactive billing. My portion? $1,200 due immediately, or face accelerated collection procedures. The smell of fresh extortion hung in the air like cheap cologne as I read the notice. Rick's company letterhead featured a logo that looked like it was designed by a drunk toddler with access to Microsoft Paint. I spent that evening researching property management licensing requirements. Turns out Rick's company wasn't properly licensed to manage HOA accounts in our state. Whoops. Filed a complaint with the state attorney general's office the next morning, complete with copies of all his threatening letters and that beautiful unlicensed company registration. Property management companies must be licensed in most states. Operating without one can void all their contracts. But the real fun started when I organized an emergency residence meeting at the community park, far away from Beatrice's prying eyes and recording devices. The gravel crunched under our feet as 23 of 47 residents showed up, an unprecedented rebellion in Willowbrook's 8-year reign of terror. Mrs. Patterson brought folding chairs and homemade cookies that smelled like cinnamon and justice. The Kowalskis contributed a thermos of coffee strong enough to wake the dead. During my research marathon, I'd stumbled across something explosive buried in the HOA's financial records. Beatrice's husband's development company, Thornfield Properties, owed $47,000 in unpaid HOA fees for work done in the neighborhood. Same company that built half our houses, same company that got no-bid contracts for emergency repairs every few months. Beatrice had never disclosed this conflict of interest to the board or residents. HOA board members must disclose financial relationships with vendors. Failure to do so can void all related decisions. The meeting felt like a revival service, with neighbors sharing their horror stories and pooling resources for a legal consultation. Mrs. Patterson surprised everyone by revealing she'd been a paralegal for 30 years before retirement. The young Kowalski couple offered to handle social media coordination. Even Mr. Rodriguez, who usually kept to himself, volunteered to help with document organization. The evening air carried the scent of determination and Mrs. Patterson's legendary chocolate chip cookies. But Beatrice wasn't done playing games. 3 days later, she struck back with the subtlety of a brick through a window. Suddenly, multiple residents received foreclosure threats for unpaid assessments. The letters arrived via certified mail, each one demanding immediate payment of the retroactive fees plus late charges, interest, and legal costs. Total damages, over $3,000 per household. She also hired an actual lawyer, a mistake that would cost her dearly, since now everything had to go through proper legal channels instead of her usual intimidation tactics. The lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman named Ms. Reeves, looked like she charged more per hour than most people made in a week. But hiring legitimate counsel meant Beatrice had to follow legitimate procedures, which meant documentation, transparency, and accountability. 3 things that were about as foreign to her as quantum physics. The harassment intensified too. Beatrice instituted daily inspection protocols, which was fancy talk for stalking. Every morning at exactly 8 a.m., she'd patrol the neighborhood with her clipboard, documenting every perceived violation with the enthusiasm of a meter maid on commission. My house got special attention. She'd stand in the street photographing my mailbox, measuring my grass height, and counting the number of cars in my driveway like she was conducting a census. The smell of desperation was starting to follow her around like bad perfume. Neighbors reported seeing her arguing with her husband in their driveway, gesticulating wildly while he shook his head and walked away. The cracks in her perfect suburban facade were showing, and everyone could see them. That's when I realized something important about bullies. They're only dangerous when you're isolated. Bring them into the light, surround them with witnesses, and suddenly their power evaporates like morning dew. Beatrice had built her kingdom on fear and secrecy, but we were dragging everything into the sunshine. The legal consultation Mrs. Patterson arranged confirmed what I suspected. Beatrice had overplayed her hand. Retroactive fees, unlicensed management companies, undisclosed conflicts of interest. It was a buffet of potential violations. Our lawyer smiled when she reviewed the evidence, the kind of smile sharks get when they smell blood in the water. Beatrice's daily harassment campaign kicked into overdrive after our legal consultation. Every morning brought a fresh violation notice slipped under my door like threatening love letters from a psychotic admirer. Grass 1/8 inch too high, $50 fine. Mailbox showing minor weather fading, $75. Car parked 3 inches beyond the invisible, proper positioning line in my own driveway, $100. The woman was measuring my property with scientific precision, armed with rulers, cameras, and the kind of obsessive attention to detail usually reserved for serial killers and tax auditors. My running tab hit $3,000 by mid-February. The notices piled up on my kitchen counter like confetti from hell, each one more ridiculous than the last. She cited me for excessive window condensation after a cold snap, claiming it created an unsightly appearance. The smell of desperation was so thick around these violations you could cut it with a knife. I started keeping a daily journal, documenting every interaction, every measurement, every time she stood in the street, photographing my house like she was gathering evidence for an alien abduction case. But here's where technology became my best friend. I'd installed security cameras after the harassment started. Nothing fancy, just basic home security equipment that recorded everything in crisp high definition. On Tuesday morning, I captured pure gold. Beatrice crouched beside my mailbox at 6 a.m., measuring my grass with a ruler while muttering to herself like a suburban bag lady. The footage was so absurd it belonged in a comedy sketch. There she was, HOA president and pillar of the community, literally on her hands and knees with a measuring tape, trying to find violations that didn't exist. I uploaded that video to our neighborhood Facebook group with the caption, "When HOA enforcement goes too far." Within hours, it had 50 comments and 200 reactions. The video went viral in our little corner of suburbia, neighbors sharing it, commenting with crying laughing emojis, and adding their own horror stories. Jenny Martinez from Channel 7 News saw the post and called that afternoon. "Mr. Hartwell, we'd like to do a story about HOA overreach. Would you be available for an interview?" The news segment aired Thursday evening. HOA President's crusade against Christmas lights escalates to daily harassment. Jenny Martinez stood in front of my house explaining how a simple holiday decoration dispute had spiraled into a campaign of petty tyranny. They showed clips of Beatrice measuring my grass, interviewed neighbors about the escalating fees and harassment, and asked viewers to share their own HOA horror stories. The segment generated 50,000 views online and hundreds of comments. Beatrice naturally declined to comment and literally hid behind her curtains when the news crew approached her door. The community response was immediate and overwhelming. Donations poured in through a GoFundMe account Mrs. Patterson set up for legal fees. $2,000 in the first day, mostly from neighbors and local viewers who'd had their own run-ins with power-drunk HOA boards. People drove by my house just to see the famous Christmas lighthouse, leaving encouraging notes and small donations in my mailbox. The morning air carried the scent of fresh coffee and vindication as supporters gathered on my lawn to share their stories. But the real breakthrough came when other victims started going public. Mr. Kowalski shared his bird feeder battle on the news segment. The Chens talked about their daughter's chalk art citation. Even quiet families who'd never spoken up before came forward with documentation of Beatrice's selective enforcement and financial irregularities. Always record interactions with HOA officials. Many states allow single-party consent for recordings. The evidence was mounting like a legal avalanche, and Beatrice was standing right in its path. City Council member Sarah Williams called for a comprehensive review of HOA regulation in our district after the news coverage. The State Attorney General's office opened a formal investigation into unlicensed property management companies operating in residential communities. Suddenly, Beatrice's little kingdom was under scrutiny from multiple government agencies, all because she couldn't leave a widower's Christmas lights alone. But Beatrice doubled down instead of backing down, which proved she had the survival instincts of a lemming. She filed a restraining order request against me, claiming the media attention constituted harassment and that I was orchestrating a campaign of intimidation against her. The judge took one look at the evidence, $3,000 in frivolous fines, daily harassment documented on security cameras, and a clear pattern of retaliation, and denied the request so fast it probably gave Beatrice whiplash. She also tried to change the locks on the community center to prevent residents from attending meetings, which was both illegal and spectacularly stupid. The locksmith, a neighbor who lived 2 streets over, called Mrs. Patterson instead of completing the job. The taste of panic must have been bitter in Beatrice's mouth as her support network crumbled faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. Even her 2 cronies on the board started distancing themselves, suddenly developing mysterious scheduling conflicts whenever she called emergency meetings. Mrs. Patterson called me on a Friday morning with the kind of excitement usually reserved for lottery winners and grandparents. "Marcus, dear, you need to get over here right now. I found something in those old HOA documents that's going to change everything." Her voice had that tremor of barely contained glee that made me grab my keys and sprint across the neighborhood like my pants were on fire. I found her in the community center storage room, surrounded by cardboard boxes that looked like they'd survived the Carter administration. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight, streaming through grimy windows as she pulled out a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse. "Look at this," she whispered, handling the documents like they were ancient scrolls. Original neighborhood covenants from 1987. The papers smelled like old libraries and forgotten promises as I read through the legalese. That's when Mrs. Patterson pointed to paragraph 17, subsection C, highlighted in yellow marker like buried treasure. "Sunset clause," she said, her paralegal training evident in every word. "The HOA automatically dissolves after 35 years unless 75% of residents vote to renew it." I did the math twice, then 3 times, because the numbers seemed too good to be true. 35 years from 1987 meant the HOA would automatically dissolve on March 15th, exactly 3 weeks away. The metallic taste of adrenaline filled my mouth as the implications hit me like a freight train loaded with justice. "But wait," Mrs. Patterson continued, pulling out more documents. "There's more." She showed me renewal notices that should have been sent to all residents 6 months prior. Instead, Beatrice had buried them in junk mail folders, scheduled the renewal vote for an obscure Wednesday morning when most people would be at work, and only informed 8 residents, her most loyal supporters. The required signatures for renewal were already forged, and Mrs. Patterson recognized Beatrice's handwriting on half of them. The cover-up was breathtaking in its audacity. Beatrice had hidden the dissolution date from 47 families, planned to ram through an illegal renewal vote with forged signatures, and would have gotten away with it if not for Mrs. Patterson's keen eye and paralegal training. The woman had been operating a shadow government, making decisions that affected people's lives and property values based on lies and forgery. "Without the HOA," I said slowly, "no more fees, no more harassment, no more Beatrice." The taste of freedom was sweeter than Mrs. Patterson's homemade cookies. But then reality set in. Some residents actually wanted the HOA for pool maintenance, snow removal, and basic community services. Dissolving it entirely might hurt property values and eliminate legitimate benefits. That's when the beautiful irony hit me. I held the nuclear option. I could let the HOA dissolve completely and watch Beatrice's entire power structure crumble overnight. But I wasn't vindictive enough to hurt my neighbors just to spite one tyrant. This was bigger than revenge. This was about rebuilding something better from the ashes of corruption. Many HOAs have automatic dissolution dates hidden in original covenants. Check your founding documents. The legal implications were staggering. Every decision Beatrice had made while hiding the dissolution date could be challenged. Every fine, every rule change, every contract with her brother-in-law's management company, all potentially invalid because they were made under false pretenses. Mrs. Patterson and I sat in that dusty storage room surrounded by decades of HOA history, holding documents that could either destroy our community association or give us the chance to rebuild it properly. The afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows across the evidence of Beatrice's deception, and I realized we had exactly 21 days to save our neighborhood from both tyranny and chaos. That evening, my living room transformed into mission control for what the neighbors had started calling Operation Spotlight. 15 residents crowded around my coffee table, which was covered in legal documents, laptops, and Mrs. Patterson's famous chocolate chip cookies. The aroma of fresh coffee mixed with the electric scent of rebellion as we planned the most elaborate takedown in HOA history. Mrs. Patterson took charge of the legal strategy with the efficiency of a general planning D-Day. "First, we document every financial irregularity from the past 3 years," she announced, spreading audit papers across my dining table. "Then we prepare fraud complaints for the state attorney general and get ready for an emergency board election. Her paralegal training showed as she organized evidence into neat piles, each one representing another nail in Beatrice's coffin. The Kowalskis volunteered for media coordination, their social media expertise making them perfect for timing the exposure. "We need everything to hit simultaneously," young Anna Kowalski explained, her laptop screen reflecting the determination in her eyes. "News coverage, social media posts, and the annual meeting reveal all happening at once for maximum impact." Her husband Mike nodded, already drafting press releases that would make Beatrice wish she'd never heard of Christmas lights. But the centerpiece of our plan was my contribution, a laser light show that would make Beatrice's annual meeting unforgettable. See, being an electrical engineer has its advantages when you want to humiliate someone publicly. I'd contacted my old colleagues at the lighting design firm where I used to consult, and they were more than happy to donate equipment for what they called the most righteous cause in suburban history. The technical setup was beautiful in its simplicity. Professional-grade laser projectors, the kind used for concerts and corporate presentations, would be disguised as standard audiovisual equipment around the community center. Custom programming synchronized to my smartphone would let me control the entire show remotely. The projectors could display charts, graphs, and text on any surface, including the walls, ceiling, and Beatrice's face if she stood in the wrong spot. The beauty of this system, I explained to my co-conspirators while testing the equipment, is that it looks completely innocent until activation. Just regular meeting technology, nothing suspicious. The laser projectors hummed quietly as they calibrated, their cooling fans barely audible over the excited chatter of my fellow rebels. Mrs. Patterson discovered that emergency board elections could be called with a petition signed by 30% of residents. We had 31 signatures within 2 days, plus detailed documentation of Beatrice's financial mismanagement and the hidden dissolution date. Most states require HOA meetings to be open to all residents. They cannot legally exclude members from attendance. The timeline was tight but manageable. Beatrice had scheduled the annual meeting for March 10th, 5 days before the automatic dissolution date she'd tried to hide. She planned to ram through the renewal vote with her hand-picked supporters, not realizing that 41 residents now knew about her deception and were planning to attend. The taste of impending justice was sweeter than anything Mrs. Patterson had ever baked. Jenny Martinez from Channel 7 agreed to cover the meeting as a community interest story, not knowing she was about to witness the most spectacular public meltdown in local government history. The state attorney general's investigator would be there too, following up on our fraud complaints. Even City Council member Sarah Williams planned to attend, drawn by the growing controversy surrounding HOA overreach in our district. We rehearsed the presentation until everyone knew their roles. Mrs. Patterson would present the financial evidence, the Kowalskis would live stream everything for social media, and I would control the laser show from my smartphone. The programming was synchronized to display financial charts showing every fraudulent expense, timeline graphics revealing the hidden dissolution date, and a spectacular finale that would spell out "Truth illuminates darkness" across the community center walls. The equipment installation happened during routine maintenance of the community center's aging audiovisual system. My lighting contacts posed as repair technicians, secretly mounting projectors in strategic locations while Beatrice was busy harassing other residents. The smell of electrical work and fresh possibility filled the air as we hid thousands of dollars worth of professional equipment in plain sight. 3 days before the meeting, we held our final strategy session. The living room buzzed with nervous energy as neighbors reviewed their assigned tasks. Mr. Rodriguez would document everything with his professional camera equipment. The Chens would coordinate with other HOA victims who wanted to attend as witnesses. Even quiet Mr. Thompson volunteered to handle security, making sure Beatrice couldn't lock anyone out or call the meeting off early. "Remember," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in legal work, "we're not just exposing one corrupt HOA president. We're showing every petty tyrant in every neighborhood that communities won't tolerate abuse of power." The room fell silent except for the gentle hum of laser projectors testing their range, preparing to paint truth across the walls of Beatrice's crumbling kingdom. 3 days before the annual meeting, Beatrice discovered the dissolution date was public knowledge, and her panic was a beautiful thing to witness. Mrs. Patterson's neighbor spotted her frantically digging through filing cabinets in the community center at midnight, flashlight in hand like some kind of suburban burglar. The woman had finally realized her 35-year secret was out, and the walls were closing in faster than a trash compactor in a horror movie. Her first desperate move was changing the meeting date to March 8th, sending out notices to only 12 residents, her remaining supporters. The plan was transparent as glass. Hold the renewal vote with minimal attendance, claim quorum was met, and ram through the HOA continuation before anyone could stop her. She even had the audacity to mark the notices confidential board business, as if that would somehow make the deception legal. But our spy network was better than the CIA. Mr. Rodriguez intercepted one of the notices and called me within an hour. "Marcus, she's trying to pull a fast one," he said, his voice tight with anger. "Meeting's been moved up, and she's only telling her cronies." The metallic taste of adrenaline hit my tongue as I realized Beatrice was willing to commit outright fraud rather than face the consequences of her corruption. The sabotage attempts escalated to comic book villain levels of stupidity. Beatrice tried to get my security cameras declared an invasion of privacy, filing complaints with the city that were so frivolous they got laughed out of the building department. She called in false reports about suspicious electronic devices in my garage, hoping to get police to confiscate my laser equipment. When Officer Rodriguez showed up for the third time that week, he just shook his head and warned her about filing false reports. Then came the bribery attempt, and oh boy, was it a masterpiece of desperation. Beatrice showed up at my door Thursday evening with the kind of fake smile you see on politicians during election season. The evening air carried the scent of her expensive perfume mixed with the unmistakable aroma of flop sweat as she launched into her pitch. "Marcus," she began, her voice honey-sweet and twice as artificial. "I've been thinking about our little misunderstanding. Perhaps we can reach an accommodation." She offered to waive all my fines, $3,000 worth, if I just drop my opposition and let the adults handle community management. When that didn't work, she hinted at a potential board position, as if I'd sell out my neighbors for a taste of her corrupt power. The conversation got really interesting when she pulled out her checkbook. "What would it take?" she asked, pen hovering over the paper like a vulture circling roadkill. 5,000? 10? I'm sure we can find a number that works for everyone. Fortunately, my state allows single-party consent for recordings, and every word was being captured by my phone in crystal-clear audio. Recording consent laws vary by state. Know your local rules before documenting evidence. When bribery failed, Beatrice escalated to full psychological warfare. Residents started receiving threatening letters about property values, warning that radical elements were trying to destroy the neighborhood's stability. Her husband's development company sent notices threatening to withdraw from all maintenance contracts, leaving us without snow removal or landscaping services. Several neighbors got cold feet, suddenly worried about the consequences of challenging someone with obvious financial resources and political connections. But the most desperate move was her attempt to frame me for harassment. Someone, and I'll give you 3 guesses, who spray-painted HOA scum on Beatrice's garage door and called the police, claiming I was escalating to property damage. Officer Rodriguez took one look at my security footage, showing Beatrice alone in her driveway at 2 a.m. with a can of spray paint, and warned her that filing false police reports was a criminal offense. Meanwhile, Mrs. Patterson had been busy with her own investigation, and the bombshells just kept coming. Turns out Beatrice's husband had filed for bankruptcy 6 months earlier. His development company was hemorrhaging money, and they'd been using HOA funds to cover personal expenses. The management company fees, the inflated maintenance contracts, even the legal fees for fighting residents, all of it was going toward keeping the Thornfield financial empire from collapsing. The smell of desperation was so thick around Beatrice you could practically see it rising off her like heat waves from summer asphalt. She'd gone from suburban queen bee to cornered rat in less than 2 months, and everyone could see the transformation. Her hair wasn't as perfect, her clothes looked wrinkled, and those trademark pearls seemed to hang around her neck like a noose made of calcium carbonate. 2 days before the meeting, I moved my laser control equipment to a backup location at Mrs. Patterson's house, connected via wireless network to the projectors hidden in the community center. If Beatrice tried to sabotage the equipment or prevent me from attending, the show would go on without me. The taste of approaching victory was sweeter than anything I'd experienced since Sarah's last Christmas. The night before the meeting, Beatrice played her final card with the desperation of a poker player going all in with a pair of 2s. She discovered my laser projector setup during what she claimed was a routine security inspection of the community center. At 11 p.m., she called the police, reporting suspicious electronic devices that could be bombs or surveillance equipment. The sheer audacity of this woman never ceased to amaze me. She was literally trying to get me arrested for planning a PowerPoint presentation. Officer Rodriguez arrived with backup, probably expecting to find some kind of domestic terrorist operation. Instead, he discovered professional lighting equipment worth more than his patrol car, all properly installed and clearly labeled as audio-visual gear. "Ma'am," he told Beatrice with the patience of a saint, "these are laser projectors, not explosive devices. They're used for business presentations." The look on her face when he refused to arrest me was worth framing and hanging on my wall. But Beatrice wasn't done with her greatest hits collection of spectacular failures. While the police were examining my equipment, she was busy staging the most pathetic false flag operation in suburban history. Someone, and I'm sure it was just a coincidence that Beatrice was seen in her backyard at midnight, threw a rock through her own kitchen window and scattered trash across her front lawn. The 911 call came at 6 a.m., complete with hysterical claims that radical HOA opponents were escalating to property destruction and threats. The staging was so obvious it belonged in a community theater production of How Not to Commit Fraud. Fresh tire tracks in her driveway that matched her own car, trash that came from her own garbage bags, and security footage from 3 different neighbors showing her alone in her yard during the alleged attack. Officer Rodriguez was developing the kind of expression you see on teachers dealing with particularly stupid students, as he explained that filing false police reports could result in criminal charges. Her final gambit was the most disgusting: attacking Sarah's memory. Anonymous flyers appeared on car windshields throughout the neighborhood, claiming I was using my deceased wife's memory to manipulate neighbors, and suggesting that my mental instability from grief made me dangerous to the community. The papers smelled like cheap printer ink and desperation as residents brought them to my door, their faces tight with anger at this new low in Beatrice's campaign. The smear campaign backfired spectacularly. Nothing unites a community faster than someone attacking a widower's relationship with his dead wife. Even residents who'd been neutral started calling to offer support, and several who'd previously stayed out of HOA politics volunteered to help with meeting security. Mrs. Chen, usually the most diplomatic person in the neighborhood, told me she'd never been so disgusted by another human being in her entire life. Meanwhile, I was putting the finishing touches on what would become known as the Willowbrook Light Show. The laser programming was synchronized to display every piece of evidence we'd gathered: financial charts showing missing funds, timeline graphics revealing Beatrice's deception, and a spectacular finale that would project her crimes across every surface in the community center. The equipment hummed quietly from its hiding spots, ready to paint truth across the walls of her carefully constructed kingdom of lies. Mrs. Patterson discovered the final bombshell while reviewing financial records one last time. Beatrice hadn't just hidden the dissolution date. She'd been embezzling money specifically to fund her husband's failing business ventures. The emergency repairs and administrative fees had gone straight into their personal accounts, totaling over $80,000 in the past 3 years. Financial transparency is your legal right. Demand detailed accounting from HOA boards, and never accept vague explanations for large expenses. The night before the meeting, 41 residents gathered at Mrs. Patterson's house for final preparations. The living room buzzed with nervous energy as people reviewed their roles and checked equipment. Jenny Martinez from Channel 7 confirmed she'd be there with a full camera crew, the State Attorney General's investigator had his recorder ready, and City Council member Williams would be taking notes for her HOA reform proposal. The taste of approaching justice filled the air like ozone before a thunderstorm. Beatrice had spent 8 years building her little empire of petty tyranny, and in less than 24 hours, it would all come crashing down in the most public way possible. The laser projectors were programmed, the evidence was organized, and the witnesses were ready. All that remained was the main event. As neighbors filed out into the night, Mrs. Patterson squeezed my hand with the grip of someone who'd seen justice delayed but never denied. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "we take back our neighborhood." The streetlights cast long shadows as people walked home, each one carrying a piece of the plan that would finally end Beatrice's reign of terror. The morning couldn't come fast enough. March 10th arrived with the kind of crisp morning air that makes everything feel possible. By 6 p.m., the community center was packed tighter than a sardine can, with 43 of 47 residents crammed into folding chairs that squeaked like mice under pressure. Jenny Martinez and her camera crew set up in the back corner, their equipment humming with the promise of viral footage. The State Attorney General's investigator sat in the front row with a digital recorder, and City Council member Williams had her notepad ready like she was covering the Watergate hearings. The smell of nervous perspiration mixed with industrial cleaning solution as Beatrice called the meeting to order, her usual confidence cracking like old paint. She looked around the packed room with the expression of someone who'd expected a quiet rubber stamp session and instead found herself facing a tribunal. Her hands shook slightly as she gripped the gavel, and those trademark pearls seemed to be choking her more than usual. "This meeting is called to discuss the renewal of our HOA charter," she began, trying to maintain control while 40-plus pairs of hostile eyes stared her down. "I move that we vote immediately on continuation of services. Point of order." I stood up, briefcase in hand, with the confidence of a man holding 4 aces. "State law requires a complete financial report before any charter renewal vote. I believe our treasurer needs to address some discrepancies." Beatrice's face went through more color changes than a chameleon in a rainbow factory. "That's not necessary, Mr. Hartwell. The board has reviewed—" "Actually," interrupted the Attorney General's investigator, his voice carrying the authority of someone who could make people's lives very uncomfortable, "I'd like to hear that financial report as well. It's relevant to our ongoing investigation." The silence that followed was so complete you could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry wasps. Beatrice looked around for support from her cronies, but even they were studying their shoes like they contained the secrets of the universe. When cornered rats start abandoning ship, you know the vessel is truly sinking. That's when I opened my briefcase and pulled out 3 years' worth of financial analysis that Mrs. Patterson and I had compiled. "Let's start with the $87,000 in questionable expenses," I announced, my voice carrying to every corner of the packed room. "Payments to unlicensed contractors, unauthorized salary increases, and mysterious administrative fees that seem to have funded personal business ventures." As I spoke, I casually pulled out my smartphone and activated the laser system. The lights dimmed slightly as professional-grade projectors came online, and suddenly the walls came alive with financial charts showing every fraudulent transaction in brilliant color. Gasps echoed through the room as residents saw their money trail laid out in laser light, each payment to Beatrice's husband's company highlighted in accusatory red. "You said my holiday lights were excessive, Beatrice," I said, watching her face turn the color of old cheese as evidence painted itself across the ceiling above her head. "How's this for a light show?" The audience erupted in applause that shook the building's cheap windows while cameras captured every moment of her public meltdown. But the real showstopper came when Mrs. Patterson stood up with the original 1987 covenants in her weathered hands. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced with the dramatic flair of a prosecutor delivering closing arguments, "I present Exhibit A, the automatic dissolution clause that Mrs. Thornfield has hidden from this community for 35 years. The laser projector shifted to display the sunset clause in letters 3 feet tall, along with evidence of the forged renewal signatures. Beatrice tried one last desperate play, grabbing the microphone like a drowning woman clutching driftwood. "This is all fabricated. These people are trying to destroy our community." But her voice cracked on the word destroy, and everyone could see the panic in her eyes. When you're caught red-handed with your fingers in the cookie jar, denying there are crumbs on your face just makes you look more guilty. The laser show reached its crescendo as "Truth Illuminates Darkness" blazed across every surface in the room, turning the community center into a cathedral of justice. Jenny Martinez's cameras captured every moment as Beatrice abandoned her gavel and fled toward the exit, leaving behind 8 years of corruption and a room full of neighbors who'd finally seen enough. Officer Rodriguez stepped forward to request all financial records for the criminal investigation, while the Attorney General's investigator began taking statements from residents. The taste of victory was sweeter than Mrs. Patterson's cookies, as 40-plus voices rose in celebration of their liberation from suburban tyranny. City Council member Williams was already drafting notes for emergency HOA reform legislation, and the video footage was destined to become an internet sensation that would inspire oppressed neighborhoods across the country. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting mad. It's getting creative with laser projectors and a room full of witnesses. 1 week later, we held an emergency board election that looked like a celebration of democracy. 45 residents showed up to vote, and I won the presidency by a margin that would make dictators weep. 43 votes to 2. Mrs. Patterson became treasurer, the Kowalskis took communications, and we filled the board with people who actually gave a damn about community service instead of personal power trips. The smell of fresh coffee and homemade pastries filled the air as neighbors who'd been strangers for years finally started talking to each other like human beings. Our first act was slashing fees by 60% after eliminating Beatrice's web of corruption and nepotism. Turns out you can run a neighborhood association quite efficiently when you're not funneling money to your brother-in-law's fake management company or paying inflated contracts to your husband's failing business. We implemented transparent financial reporting with monthly statements posted online because sunlight really is the best disinfectant for suburban corruption. All those ridiculous fines got forgiven and refunded, putting $12,000 back into residents' pockets just in time for spring home improvements. My personal settlement from the embezzlement recovery totaled enough to make a grown man cry tears of joy, and I donated half to establish the Sarah Hartwell Community Scholarship Fund for local kids pursuing engineering degrees. The other half went toward the most spectacular holiday light display Willowbrook had ever seen, because some traditions are worth fighting for. The annual Light Up Willowbrook Festival was born that December, transforming our quiet neighborhood into a destination that draws visitors from 3 counties. Families drive for hours to see the synchronized laser show that tells the story of community courage, and we raise serious money for the Children's Hospital where Sarah received her final care. The festival has that magical quality that turns strangers into friends and makes children believe in wonder again. Beatrice and her husband disappeared faster than morning mist, selling their house at a loss and fleeing to parts unknown before the criminal charges could catch up with them. The foreclosure auction was particularly satisfying. I may have stood on my front lawn that morning, watching the moving trucks with a cup of coffee and a smile that could power small appliances. My holiday lights are perfectly visible from where their bedroom window used to be, twinkling like tiny middle fingers every December night. But the real victory was personal healing. Community leadership gave me purpose beyond grief, and helping neighbors fight their own battles reminded me that Sarah's spirit of service lived on through shared action. I even started dating Mrs. Patterson's daughter, Linda, a visiting nurse with Sarah's kindness and the backbone to handle an ornery widower with strong opinions about suburban justice. Life has a way of surprising you when you're busy making other plans. The story went viral beyond our wildest dreams, inspiring HOA reform legislation in 12 states and making me an accidental expert on community association governance. I testified before our state legislature about the need for transparency and accountability, and our Willowbrook model bylaws are now used by neighborhoods across the country. Sometimes fighting one small battle creates ripples that spread far beyond what you ever imagined possible. Your HOA works for you, not the other way around. Never let petty tyrants forget that fundamental truth. The consulting business I started helps other communities escape their own versions of Beatrice, proving that knowledge plus courage can topple any suburban dictator dumb enough to pick fights with people who have nothing left to lose. Every December, when the laser show dedicates a special song to absent friends, I think about Sarah and how proud she'd be of the community we built from the ashes of corruption. The community center now displays a plaque reading, "In memory of those who taught us that small lights can banish great darkness." Truth really does illuminate everything when you shine it bright enough. So here's my challenge to you. Drop your HOA horror story in the comments below, because I guarantee you're not alone in this fight. Share this with anyone being bullied by petty authority figures who think a clipboard makes them royalty. Subscribe for more David versus Goliath stories, because standing up to suburban bullies never goes out of style. And remember, documentation defeats corruption every single time, especially when you add laser projectors and a room full of angry neighbors.